Hi, and welcome to another episode of No Bones About It. I'm Anna Doty, curator of the Mutter Museum, filling in for Robert Hicks. And today we have K.R. Sands, author of the book Boy of Bone. These are 12 stories inspired by objects and specimens in the Mutter Museum. Well, K.R. Sands, thank you so much for being here. Now let's get right to it. What inspired this book? How did this come about?
It didn't start out to be a book. It started out to be a story, and then another story, and then by the time I got to the third story, I thought, I think I'm onto something here, because the ideas kept coming. You know, with the thousands of objects in the Mutter Museum, I thought, I can keep going. So I didn't really start out to do the book as a project, but I just wrote a story. The first one was about the wax model of the old woman with the horn, Madame Sunday, and I'd wondered about that model for a long time, because that woman let the horn, the cornucutaneum, grow for 6 years, and I couldn't figure out why, because she'd had 2 other horns removed, and I thought, okay, she knows how to have a horn removed. Why didn't she have that big monster taken off? So I kind of wrote the story as one possible answer to why she might have waited 6 years. And the story took forever to write, but when I was done, I liked it, and I thought, oh, I can do this. So I did another one.
Great. Now, you had a good point. We have tens of thousands of objects in the museum, 12 stories, 12 specimens or objects used. So what was the criteria? Were these objects that spoke to you, or what made you choose those specific ones?
They were objects or ideas behind objects that made me curious. They were objects that made me ask questions I didn't necessarily know the answers to. For instance, you have wax models of faces with leprosy. And in looking at those faces, the symptoms of leprosy don't really look any worse than the symptoms of advanced syphilis or gangrene or some others. But I was interested in the very visceral response that people have to the word leprosy. It's because of the Judeo-Christian history that leprosy is divine punishment somehow. So people are really reacting to the idea of leprosy, the word leprosy, not to what it looks like, because it doesn't look any worse than a lot of other diseases.
Right. And how much of yourself did you interject into your stories? I mean, did you use a little bit of the background? Some of the specimens we have a lot of information on. We have backstories and sometimes their whole life stories in the case of Harry Eastlack.
Right.
But in other things, we have hardly anything. So how much, in certain stories, how much did you take that was provenance, that was actual information, and how much did you kind of come up with on your own, and why?
When I knew what the historical facts were, for instance, in the case of the old woman with the horn, we know quite a lot about her. We know her name, we know her occupation, we know where she lived, we know when she lived. We know quite a lot about her because she was famous. Well, her wax model was famous at the time. And because that was my first story, I didn't play too much with the historical data. I tried to cram the whole story around the historical facts, but I wasn't very good then. I mean, that was my first story. As I got easier with the process, I made more up. And several of the stories don't have, for instance, the story about the lead poisoning. I was inspired by an exhibit you had on lead poisoning a couple of years ago, but the story itself was based on an experience I had in working as an animal laboratory technician many years ago, because vivisection is a very controversial topic. So is humanity's relationship with lead, which we don't seem to be able to do without, even though we know it's very bad for us.
That's a good point. And I did have a trouble with the vivisection one, ironically. That was the one that I was just a little,
It's a hard question, because, as you know, many medical advances have been made through vivisection. Many thousands of human beings have benefited from vivisection. but it's a very hard thing to face. And you know, today with modern medical modeling, computer modeling and imaging, the question has arisen anew: do we still need it? Even, you know, if we did need it for the last several hundred years, do we need it now?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it's a tough one.
Any regrets? Were there any objects either you tried to write a story, it just didn't happen, it didn't gel, or is it a chance that you'll have a volume 2? Are there a lot that you want to come back and do? Was that one elusive specimen that just wouldn't be written about?
There were a couple of stories that didn't pan out at all. You have some old photographs of inmates from Blockley Asylum, and I was working with a story about an inmate, and it was emotionally too challenging for me at that point. It might be something I could do down the road, but I couldn't do it then, and so that story did not make it into this collection.
Interesting. Well, now another story that I found very interesting is you do almost every story takes place in the present or the past, but you have one story that's in the future.
Yes.
And in the future, the museum doesn't exist. And so what made you want to disappear the Mutter Museum, in a sense?
I wanted the collection to encompass the life of the museum from before its inception to its end, because the organic material that makes up the specimens in the Mutter Museum, this is all deteriorating, even though careful preservation methods prevent it from deteriorating as rapidly as it otherwise would. But as you know, some of Dr. Mutter's original specimens are already nearly 200 years old.
Right. They
won't last forever. And I wanted to get the lifespan of the museum in as emblematic of the lifespan of any organic entity. We're all born, we all die, there's a life in between.
Great. Yeah. Can we look forward maybe to a volume 2? Do you anticipate this as continuing on, or we just have to be happy with what we have?
Well, for a while, yes, you have to be happy with this one. But as you say, there's so many specimens in the museum. I think it would be ridiculous to say never on a volume 2. And the museum's been here for a long time. It's open to artists and writers and all kinds of people, and I think it's a wonderful opportunity for non-medical people to come in and see the human experience in a different way.
Wonderful. Well, again, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for watching, and don't forget to come down to the museum where you can see a lot of the specimens mentioned in this book on exhibit. You can also buy this book in our museum store, with a portion of the proceeds going to benefit the museum. So stop on by and stay tuned for another episode.
Andrea, we always hear that art imitates life, but how about art imitating death? What do you got?
I got some amazing bones that were lent to me by the curator, who teaches lots of forensic anatomy as well as just normal human anatomy. And I put together an articulated arm and hand and a skull that had been pieced back together after it had been smashed like an egg, and laid them on top of a wonderful spread from Vesalius Anatomy, one of the most famous anatomy books done in the late Renaissance. And I was able to position the articulated arm and hand and the pieced together skull to mimic one of the very classic poses that Vesalius used in his anatomy book.
You heard it here first, folks. Art imitating death, a skeleton posing as an anatomical illustration. That's great. Thank you.